A $5 bill, worn thin and creased into a fragile square, was the key that unlocked a $9 billion kingdom. It was the catalyst that would shatter a powerful dynasty and rewrite the future of an empire built on steel, oil, and ruthless ambition. When Alistair Finch, the aging lion of Wall Street known as the Vulture, shuffled into a grimy, forgotten diner on the industrial outskirts of Chicago, he was a ghost in his own city. Dressed in clothes salvaged from a charity bin, he was searching for the one asset his vast fortune could never acquire, a person of unshakable integrity. He never expected to find her in Clara, a 24-year-old waitress whose exhaustion was etched into the fine lines around her eyes. But when he slid his last $5 across the sticky table as a test, her response did more than surprise him. It ignited a revolution in his cynical, dying heart. What she said in that moment didn't just earn his gratitude, it convinced a billionaire to disinherit his own blood and wager his entire legacy on a stranger. The rain fell on Chicago with a percussive fury, drumming against the corrugated iron roofs of the warehouses and turning the asphalt of the service roads into black mirrors. Inside the Haven, a diner that was anything but, the air hung thick with the ghosts of fried onions, burnt coffee, and the quiet desperation of the third shift. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, and Clara Evans was running on fumes and 4 hours of broken sleep. She refilled a trucker's coffee mug, her smile practiced and weary. At 24, she possessed the pragmatic soul of a woman twice her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and a faded pen stain marred the pocket of her apron, a silent testament to the accounting textbook she kept tucked away for the rare, quiet moments between customers. A quiet buzz vibrated in her pocket. She glanced down, her stomach tightening into a familiar knot. It was a text from the hospital's billing department. Ms. Evans, this is a final reminder regarding the outstanding balance for Leo Evans's cardiac consultation. Payment of $2,800 is required within 72 hours to schedule his pre-operative assessment. 72 hours. She had $312 to her name. Her brother Leo, all of 16 years old, had a heart that was failing him, a ticking clock that grew louder with every missed payment. The math, as always, was a cruel joke. "Evans, Table 6 needs a wipe down, not a séance," barked Henderson, the night manager, a man whose personality was as greasy as the grill he seldom cleaned. "On it, Henderson," she replied, her voice a monotone of practiced obedience. As she moved toward the cracked vinyl booth, the bell over the door gave a weak, tinny jingle. A gust of wind, carrying the scent of wet pavement and decay, ushered in a man who seemed to be composed of little more than shadows and damp wool. He was old, his back bent into a permanent question mark, and he leaned heavily on a gnarled wooden cane. His coat was a patchwork of stains and tears, his face obscured by a low-slung beanie and a week's worth of silver stubble. He moved with a pained, deliberate slowness, each step a negotiation with gravity. Henderson was on him in an instant, a bulldog blocking the path to a bone. "Hey pal, hold on. This ain't a flophouse. We reserve the right to refuse service." The old man lifted his head, and in the dim light, Clara saw his eyes. They were a startling, piercing blue, as sharp and cold as chips of ice, a stark contrast to the rest of his dilapidated appearance. "I have money," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "A coffee. Black." "Let's see it," Henderson sneered, folding his beefy arms. The few patrons in the diner, a pair of night-shift security guards and the trucker, watched with a mixture of pity and revulsion. With a trembling hand, the old man dug into a pocket and produced a small, crumpled wad of bills. He painstakingly unfolded them on his palm. a 5 and 3 singles, $8. Coffee's $2.50. You got enough for that, Henderson conceded, his tone suggesting it was a grand act of charity. But you sit at the counter. The booths are for real customers. Henderson, stop it. Clara's voice cut through the stale air. She stepped forward, placing herself between the manager and the old man. Don't start with me, Evans, Henderson warned. He's a customer, she said, her gaze firm. She looked at the old man, shivering under the fluorescent lights. He looked fragile, but there was a flicker of something else in those icy eyes. Not weakness, but a profound, weary appraisal. He reminded her of the way her father looked in his last days, a proud man whittled down by a world that had stopped seeing him. He can have my staff table by the radiator. It's no trouble. Henderson grumbled, waving a dismissive hand. Fine. But if he stinks up the joint, you're the one scrubbing it down, and it comes out of your tips. Deal, she said without hesitation. She turned to the old man, her practiced smile becoming something genuine. Hi, I'm Clara. Don't mind him. His coffee's as bitter as he is. Come on, sir. Let's get you warmed up. The old man studied her face for a long, unnerving moment. His gaze so intense it felt as though he were committing every detail to memory. Thank you, young lady, he murmured. He followed her to the small, two-person table tucked away in the corner. What Clara couldn't know, what no one in that diner could possibly imagine, was that the threadbare coat concealed the frame of a man accustomed to bespoke suits from Milan. The homeless man was Alistair Finch, the legendary and feared CEO of Finch Consolidated, a global behemoth with a market capitalization that dwarfed the GDP of small nations. And he wasn't just cold and seeking shelter. He was on a hunt. Alistair settled into the chair, the warmth from the ancient radiator, a welcome relief to bones that ached with a very real and very terminal cancer. He watched Clara as she moved through the diner. For 5 decades he had watched people, predators in boardrooms, sycophants at galas, and his own 2 children, Donovan and Beatrice, who had been circling his fortune for years like vultures waiting for the lion to draw its last breath. 2 weeks ago, his doctor had delivered the verdict with clinical detachment. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 6 months, if he was lucky. When he had informed his children, Beatrice had immediately inquired about updating her power of attorney, while Donovan had asked if this would affect the timing of the next dividend payout. In that moment, Alistair had confronted a horrifying truth. His life's work, the empire he had built from nothing, was destined to become a playground for 2 greedy, vacuous fools he neither liked nor respected. He needed an heir, not of his bloodline, but of his original spirit, the hungry, clever grit he'd had as a young man. So he had devised this final, desperate test. Dressed in rags, he had visited 7 of his own company's high-end hotel lobbies and 4 of the city's most exclusive restaurants. He had been forcibly removed from every single one, often by security guards whose salaries he paid. Clara returned, placing a steaming mug of coffee before him. Beside it, she set a plate with a thick slice of apple pie. I didn't order this, Alistair said gruffly, maintaining his character. It's from a cancelled order, Clara said with a slight shrug. Gonna get tossed otherwise. Figured you might have a sweet tooth. It was a lie. Alistair, a man who could dissect a corporate balance sheet in seconds, knew the razor-thin margins of a place like this. Every slice was accounted for. This was her own food, her own small indulgence, and she was giving it to him. Why are you being so kind to me? He challenged, his voice low and gravelly. Clara paused, wiping a stray drop of coffee from the table with a napkin. She looked out the window at the rain-streaked darkness, her shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second. "My little brother, Leo. He's sick. Needs surgery. He's the kindest person I know. He'd give you the shirt off his back, even if it was the only one he had." She turned back, her brown eyes clear and direct. "The world feels transactional. Everyone's always calculating. What's in it for them? I guess I just think that kindness shouldn't have a price tag. You're a person, and you looked cold. It's as simple as that." Alistair felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Transactional. That was the word that had defined his entire existence. Every merger, every handshake, every relationship had been a transaction. He took a sip of the coffee to mask his reaction. "Kindness is a liability in this world, girl. It'll get you crushed." "Maybe," she conceded with a small, sad smile. "But a world without it isn't worth living in." She left him to his pie. Alistair ate slowly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He saw her pull out a thick, dog-eared textbook during a lull and underline a passage with fierce concentration. He watched as the trucker at the counter left her a measly $1 tip on a $20 bill, and she still wished him a safe drive with a genuine smile. He saw Henderson dock her pay for the free pie, and she accepted it with a quiet nod. No argument, no complaint. She wasn't just kind, she was resilient. She had a core of steel beneath the weary exterior. When he was finished, Alistair reached into the deep inner pocket of his coat. Tucked away was a money clip holding several $1,000s in crisp $100 bills. But the test wasn't about a grand gesture. It was about the small ones. He pulled out a single worn $5 bill. In the context of his appearance, it was a significant tip, likely a large portion of his worldly wealth. He placed it on the table and waved Clara over. "I'm leaving," he said, pushing himself up with a groan. The pie was acceptable. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," she said, her eyes falling to the $5 bill on the table. A flicker of something, surprise, relief, crossed her face before she carefully masked it. She picked up the bill. "Sir, you left this." She held it out to him. "It's for you," Alistair said, his voice deliberately stubborn. "For the service." Clara looked from the bill to his worn, soaked shoes. They were cheap canvas, with a hole forming near the little toe. $5 could buy a hot meal tomorrow. It could buy a pair of thick, dry wool socks from the army surplus store down the block. She stepped closer and gently took his cold, chapped hand. She pressed the bill back into his palm, her own hand surprisingly warm and firm. "I can't take this," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I have my pride, girl," Alistair snapped, a flash of his old imperious self breaking through. "Don't you dare pity me." "This isn't pity," she said, and her gaze was so direct it felt as if she were looking past the rags, past the persona, and straight into his soul. And then she delivered the words that would topple an empire. "Sir, dignity isn't something you buy or sell. It's something you recognize in another person. Your dignity is worth more than $5, and frankly, so is mine. I won't take your last bit of security just to make myself feel better. Please, keep it. Buy yourself some warm socks. It would make me happy to know your feet are dry." Alistair Finch stood frozen. The world outside the diner, the rain, the distant wail of a siren, faded into a dull hum. Dignity isn't something you buy or sell. His children measured their own worth in stock options and auction prices. His board members measured it in quarterly earnings. He himself had spent a lifetime putting a price on everything and everyone. And here, in a forgotten corner of the city, a young woman with nothing was teaching him the meaning of true value. He looked at the $5 in his hand as if it were a foreign object. Then he looked back at her. "You truly believe that?" he whispered, the statement a realization, not a question. "Go on," she urged gently, a small smile touching her lips. "Get those socks, and come back for coffee tomorrow. It's on me." Alistair nodded, a slow, jerky motion. He didn't trust himself to speak. He turned and walked out into the relentless rain, the $5 bill clutched in his fist with more reverence than he had ever held a $1 billion contract. He rounded the corner into a dark, waiting alley where a gleaming, obsidian-black Maybach waited, its engine purring almost silently. A man-mountain named Marcus, his chauffeur and head of security for 30 years, opened the rear door. "Sir, any trouble?" Alistair shed the damp, foul-smelling coat, revealing the impeccable cashmere sweater beneath. He sank into the plush cream leather, the scent of expensive wood polish and old money filling his senses. "Get Gable on the phone," Alistair commanded, his voice regaining its familiar, authoritative timbre. "It's nearly 3 a.m., sir," Marcus noted calmly. "I don't care if he's in surgery. Get him on the phone now," Alistair said, his gaze fixed on the diner's flickering sign disappearing in the rain-streaked window. "Tell him to tear up the current draft of my will. We're starting over. From scratch." The penthouse apartment atop Finch Tower was less a home and more a sterile monument to power. It was a world of floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist art, and a silence so profound it seemed to have a weight of its own. Beatrice Finch, Alistair's 42-year-old daughter, glided across the polished marble floor, a flute of champagne in her hand, her voice a blade of perfectly modulated ice. "I don't care what the Foundation's bylaws say, Donovan," she hissed into her phone. "The charity gala is in 3 weeks. We need Father's name as the primary benefactor. It's essential for the brand, my brand." On the other end of the line, from a private suite at a casino in Macau, Donovan Finch laughed. At 38, he was his father's shadow, possessing all of Alistair's appetite for risk, but none of his genius. "Relax, B. The old man is probably off on another one of his slumming it adventures. Let him play pauper. As long as he's alive to sign the checks, who cares? I've got a situation here that requires a bit more liquidity." "He's meeting with Gable again tonight," Beatrice said, her voice dropping. "For the 3rd time this week. Marcus told me. He's been holed up in the study for hours." Donovan's laughter died. "Gable? Why the hell is he meeting with the estate lawyer so often?" "The succession plan was finalized years ago." "That's what I intend to find out," Beatrice said, her eyes narrowing as she looked out at the sprawling city below, a kingdom she believed was her birthright. "I'm on my way to the house now. If he's trying to add some last-minute sentimental clause for a mistress, I'll have it annulled before the body is cold." Meanwhile, in the mahogany-lined study of the Finch family mansion, Alistair sat across from a man who had been his confidant and legal executioner for 40 years. Elias Gable was a man of quiet gravitas, with silver hair and a mind like a steel trap. "Alistair, you must understand the ramifications," Gable said, his pen hovering over a fresh stack of legal documents. "This isn't an amendment. This is an abdication. You are not just disinheriting Donovan and Beatrice. You are erasing them. The legal challenges will be biblical." Alistair coughed, a deep, rattling sound that spoke of his body's betrayal. "They erased themselves, Elias. They are hollow. I spent my life building a fortress, and I raised 2 people who would sell the stones for scrap." He leaned forward, his icy eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "That girl, Clara, she has nothing. She's fighting for her brother's life, working 2 jobs, studying between orders, and she offered me kindness with no expectation of reward. She gave me dignity. He slammed a frail fist on the desk. Donovan just lost $50 million on a bad commodities trade and asked me to cover it. Beatrice is more concerned with the seating chart at the opera than the health of the men who work in our factories. I will not reward vultures. I will empower an eagle. They will paint her as a predator, Gable warned, a schemer who took advantage of a dying, senile old man. They will drag her through a public hell that will make her life at that diner look like a vacation. Which is why you will protect her, Alistair countered, sliding a thick file across the desk. I had Marcus's team do a full workup. She's impeccable, no criminal record, no addictions, just a mountain of medical debt and a fierce devotion to her brother. She's a fighter. We're just giving her a better sword. Alistair picked up the pen. His hand shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer, earth-shattering gravity of his decision. Structure it as a blind trust, effective upon my death, he commanded. The beneficiary's name is to be sealed. Let Donovan and Beatrice think they've won. Let them expose their greed to the board, to the world. A grim, satisfied smile touched his lips. Let them throw their victory party on the deck of the Titanic. Then, Elias, you strike the iceberg. He signed the document with a flourish that belied his condition. Alistair Finch. It's done, he whispered, leaning back, a profound sense of peace settling over him for the first time in months. Now, the real work can begin. 3 weeks later, the news broke like a thunderclap across the financial world. Alistair Finch, the vulture of Wall Street, dead at 79. The markets shuddered. Tributes from world leaders and business titans flooded the news feeds. But at the Haven Diner, the story was just background noise on the small television mounted above the counter, its screen flecked with grease. Clara was expertly balancing 4 plates on one arm when she saw his face on the screen. It was a formal portrait, Alistair Finch in a sharp tuxedo, his expression severe, his eyes the color of a winter sky. Those eyes. She froze mid-stride. They were Artie's eyes, the kind, shivering old man she'd given pie to. She'd been saving a warm wool scarf for him, hoping he'd return. A pang of genuine loss hit her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. It was the hospital again. Urgent. Leo Evans's condition has deteriorated. We need to schedule immediate surgery. A deposit of $50,000 is required to book the OR. Please contact us within 24 hours. The plates slipped from her grasp. They crashed to the linoleum floor in an explosion of ceramic and scrambled eggs. Evans! Henderson roared from his office. That's your whole damn paycheck! Clara sank to her knees, the world spinning. $50,000. It might as well have been 50 billion. As she began to pick up the broken pieces, tears of helpless fury blurring her vision, she didn't see the sleek, black Maybach pull up to the curb. She didn't see Elias Gable step out, his expression somber, his purpose absolute. The reading of the will took place in the grand, suffocatingly formal library of the Finch mansion. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and entitlement. Donovan and Beatrice sat at the head of the polished table, their attempts at mournful expressions betrayed by the avaricious gleam in their eyes. Let's dispense with the theatrics, Gable, Donovan said impatiently, checking his gold watch. We all know the terms. 50-50 split of the personal assets and joint control of the board. Just tell us where to sign. Gable adjusted his spectacles, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. Mr. Finch made some substantial revisions to his final testament in the weeks preceding his death. Beatrice stiffened. Revisions? What sort of revisions? He came to believe, Gable began, his voice even and measured, that the stewardship of Finch Consolidated required not just a head for business, but a heart for humanity. "Oh, spare us the poetry," Beatrice snapped. "Get to the numbers." Gable opened the heavy leather-bound portfolio. "To my son, Donovan," he read, his voice resonating in the silent room. "I leave my collection of first-edition novels in the hope that he might one day read one and learn something. I leave him no shares, no property, and no access to the family trust." Donovan's face went slack, the color draining from it. "What? Is this a joke?" "To my daughter, Beatrice," Gable continued, his gaze unwavering. "I leave my late wife's gardening tools, so she might learn the value of nurturing something other than her own ego. I leave her no shares, no property, and no access to the family trust." Beatrice shot to her feet, her chair clattering backward. "This is preposterous. He was delirious, medicated. We will contest this. We will destroy you." "I haven't concluded," Gable said, his voice rising slightly, quelling her outburst. "The entirety of the Finch estate, including all personal assets, properties, and the controlling 51% stake in Finch Consolidated, valued at approximately $9.4 billion, is to be transferred in its entirety to a single, non-familial beneficiary." "Who?" Donovan choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. Gable paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. "The sole beneficiary is a Ms. Clara Evans." "Who in God's name is Clara Evans?" Beatrice shrieked, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into raw fury. "She is a waitress at the Haven Diner on the South Side," Gable stated calmly. "And as of the moment I finish this sentence, she is the new majority shareholder of this company, the owner of this house, and effectively, your new boss." He closed the portfolio with a soft, definitive thud. "Security will now escort you from the premises. Ms. Evans will decide if and when you are permitted to return." As two imposing security guards moved toward them, Donovan sat in stunned silence, while Beatrice erupted into a torrent of curses, sweeping a priceless vase from its pedestal. Gable simply stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of the room. "Marcus," he said to the driver waiting outside, "take me to the Haven. I have an inheritance to deliver." The scene at the diner was one of quiet devastation. Henderson stood over Clara, his arms crossed, his face a mask of petty tyranny. "You're a liability, Evans. Always daydreaming, always distracted. Pack your things. You're fired." Clara didn't have the energy to argue. Fired, evicted, her brother's life hanging by a thread. It was the final blow. As she untied the strings of her stained apron, the diner's bell chimed. Elias Gable stepped inside, and the atmosphere of the room instantly changed. In his perfectly tailored suit, he was an emissary from another world. The diner fell silent. Even Henderson seemed to shrink, his bluster evaporating. "May I help you, sir?" Henderson asked, his voice suddenly obsequious. Gable's eyes scanned the room, bypassing the manager entirely and landing on the young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and defeated shoulders. "I am looking for Ms. Clara Evans." "She's just leaving," Henderson stammered. "I am aware," Gable said, his tone glacial. He approached Clara, his expression softening with a hint of compassion. "Miss Evans, my name is Elias Gable. I was the personal attorney for a man you knew as Artie." Clara's head snapped up. "Artie? Is he... Did he?" "He passed away," Gable confirmed gently. "He spoke of you often in his final days. He called you the last honest person in Chicago." He placed his briefcase on the counter and opened it. "Clara, Alistair Finch was one of the wealthiest men in the world, and in his will, he left you everything Clara stared at him, the words failing to compute. Everything? What? His coat? His cane? His company? His homes? His fortune? Gable said, placing a thick legal document in front of her. You have inherited Finch Consolidated and an estate valued at over $9 billion. The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Henderson made a sound like a deflating tire. Clara swayed, gripping the counter for support. No, that's impossible. This is a mistake. I'm a waitress. You were a waitress, Gable corrected her kindly. Now, you are one of the most powerful women in America. Arthur believed you had the integrity to wield that power justly. He believed you would know what to do with it. Henderson, his face now a ghastly shade of pale, rushed forward. Clara, sweetheart, I was just testing you. A little motivational exercise. You passed. You're not fired. You're promoted. Assistant manager. Clara looked at Henderson's desperate, sweating face. She looked at the broken plates on the floor. She looked at the legal document that held an impossible new reality. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt the crushing weight on her shoulders begin to lift. She took off her apron and placed it on the counter. Henderson, she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of its earlier tremor. Send my final paycheck to the pediatric cardiac wing at Chicago General Hospital. She turned to Gable. Can we go now? The first thing I need to do is save my brother's life. Of course, Ms. Evans, Gable said with a respectful nod. As they walked out, and the door of the Maybach closed, sealing her off from her old life, Clara knew one thing for certain. Artie hadn't just given her a fortune, he had given her a sword. And she was about to go to war. The battle for the Finch Empire began not in a boardroom, but in the most exclusive restaurant in Chicago, Aurelia. Perched on the 95th floor of a skyscraper, it was a place where whispers could move markets, and a dinner for two cost more than Clara's annual salary. Elias Gable had brought her here under the guise of a celebratory dinner, but his true purpose was strategic. You need to understand the world you now inhabit, he'd said. You need to see the animals in their natural habitat. Clara felt painfully out of place in the simple but elegant black dress Gable's assistant had procured for her. She clutched the water glass, her knuckles white, as she looked out at the glittering carpet of city lights below. They will not make this easy, Gable said, his voice a low murmur against the clinking of crystal and silver. Donovan and Beatrice have retained Silas Croft. Clara looked up. Should I know that name? He's a corporate assassin in a lawyer's suit. He doesn't win cases. He destroys lives. He will dig into every corner of your past, your brother's illness, your parents' debts, every mistake you've ever made. He will try to paint you as an unstable, manipulative gold digger to the board. A cold dread washed over Clara, but it was quickly replaced by a familiar, stubborn fire. Let him try. My life is an open, boring book of hard work and bad luck. It was then that she heard a laugh from a nearby table, a loud, braying sound that dripped with arrogance. She glanced over. Seated in a prime booth were Donovan and Beatrice Finch. Beatrice looked regal and venomous in emerald silk, while Donovan was already flushed from expensive scotch. They hadn't seen her yet. It's perfect, Donovan was saying, his voice, the sound carried across the hushed, cavernous space of Aurelia, a brittle, arrogant laugh that seemed to shatter the carefully curated tranquility. Donovan Finch, already 2 scotches deep, leaned back in the plush velvet booth, a king surveying a domain he believed was already his. It's bulletproof, he declared, his voice a conspiratorial boom that was anything but quiet. We filed the motion to declare her incompetent. The board is already on our side. They're terrified of a waitress holding the reins. While the estate is frozen in litigation, I'll leverage the assets in the Cayman subsidiary, the Phoenix Fund, to cover my margin calls. By the time the courts sort it out, the money will be clean, and we'll have enough leverage to force a buyout. Beatrice, a predator coiled in emerald silk, took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes cold as chips of jade. Just be sure your tracks are covered, Donovan. Croft says the girl is clean, which means our only play is to prove she's incapable of running the company. Any hint of financial misconduct on our part could backfire. It's a simple asset-backed securities swap. It's not even illegal, just aggressive. Donovan scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. The paperwork is already filed. It'll be executed at market open tomorrow. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, a dizzying, icy plunge. The city lights, a brilliant tapestry of 1 billion dreams, spread out 95 floors below, blurred into a meaningless smear. Gable's hand tightened on her arm, a silent, urgent warning to stay still, to observe, to retreat. But Clara wasn't listening. She was in another time, another place. It was 3:17 a.m. The Haven diner was empty, save for the hum of the coolers. The air smelled of stale coffee and bleach. She was hunched over a heavy, dog-eared corporate finance textbook, her eyelids gritty with exhaustion, her mind a fog of terms and theories. A single chapter had held her attention, a case study on the spectacular collapse of Omnicorp, a cautionary tale of corporate malfeasance. Cayman subsidiary, asset-backed securities swap, Phoenix project. The words echoed in her memory, not as abstract concepts from a textbook, but as live ammunition being loaded into a weapon pointed at the heart of her new, terrifying reality. Donovan wasn't just covering his gambling debts. He was performing a corporate vivisection, carving out a profitable, thriving tech division of Finch Consolidated, a division that employed nearly 4,000 people to save his own skin. He was going to burn down a village to light his cigar. The sheer, casual violence of it stole her breath. She looked at Gable, the wise, steady man who had been her guide in this strange new world. He saw the shift in her expression, the way the fear in her eyes was not extinguished, but forged into something else. Something hard and sharp. The terror was still there, a hummingbird beating its wings against her ribs, but it was now caged by a cold, righteous fury. This wasn't about a fortune anymore. It was about the lives of 4,000 people who would be jobless by the end of the week. It was about the legacy Alistair had entrusted to her, not as a treasure to be hoarded, but as a fortress to be defended. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was a whisper, yet it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. She placed her napkin on the table and stood, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Clara, don't!" Gable hissed, his face a mask of alarm. "This is not the place. We will handle this tomorrow, strategically." She looked down at him, and for the first time, he saw the woman Alistair Finch must have seen. Not the weary waitress, but the eagle. "Strategy," she said, her voice low and resonant, "is for people who have the luxury of time. 4,000 people are about to lose their jobs. Their time runs out at market open." She turned and walked toward the Finch's table. Each step on the plush carpet felt like a step onto a new continent. The air grew thin. The faces of the other diners turned toward her, sensing the shift in the room's emotional barometric pressure. She was no longer Clara Evans, the imposter in a borrowed dress. She was the instrument of a dying man's last, desperate hope. Donovan and Beatrice looked up as her shadow fell across their table. Their expressions morphed from mild annoyance to a sneering, blatant disdain. They saw a nobody, a piece of social furniture that had forgotten its place. "Can we help you?" Beatrice's voice was a silken whip, designed to humiliate and dismiss. "The restrooms are in the back, darling." Clara placed her palms flat on the polished mahogany of their table. The wood was cool and solid beneath her trembling hands. She leaned forward, not in supplication, but in accusation. She locked her gaze on Donovan, whose face was a portrait of smug, alcohol-fueled confidence. "The Phoenix Fund," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "An interesting choice of name. A bit on the nose, don't you think?" Donovan blinked, his smirk faltering. I have no idea what you're talking about." "Let me refresh your memory," Clara continued, the tremor in her hands ceasing as the words flowed, crisp and certain. "The original Phoenix project, from the Omnicorp scandal of 2008. It resulted in a 10-year prison sentence for its CFO, a Mr. Julian Croft. Any relation to your lawyer, by the way? The charge was felony wire fraud and a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 302, Corporate Responsibility for Financial Reports." Donovan's face, which had been flushed with scotch, turned the color of ash. Beside him, Beatrice sat rigid, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. "You're using an asset-backed securities swap, routing it through your Cayman subsidiary to transfer the tangible value of Finch Technologies' intellectual property portfolio to an offshore entity." Clara laid out the crime with the cold precision of a surgeon. "This creates a fraudulent paper debt against the parent company, allowing you to extract hundreds of millions in capital while claiming a catastrophic tax loss. It's a classic shell game. The problem, Mr. Finch, is that you are using corporate assets, not personal funds, and you've falsified the asset valuation reports to secure the initial transfer. That's not just aggressive accounting. That's felony embezzlement and securities fraud." Beatrice finally found her voice, a strangled, furious gasp. "Who in God's name do you think you are?" A small, grim smile touched Clara's lips. It held no warmth, only the chilling promise of consequences. "I'm Clara Evans. I'm the waitress who is, according to your court filing, too emotionally unstable and intellectually incompetent to run your father's company." She straightened up, her posture regal, her voice rising to a clear, commanding pitch that caused Fawkes to pause mid-air at the surrounding tables. "And as the majority shareholder and acting CEO of Finch Consolidated, I am informing you both that you are suspended indefinitely from the board of directors, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your access to all company properties, including your cars and apartments, is revoked. Security is changing the locks as we speak." She turned her full attention back to Donovan, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Cancel your trade for tomorrow morning, because at 8 a.m. sharp, Mr. Gable will be hand-delivering a full confession of your plot, complete with the preliminary evidence my auditors found this afternoon, to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Your little scheme is over." She turned her back on their shattered, horrified faces and walked away. The restaurant was a tomb, utterly silent except for the distant, mournful sound of a siren rising from the city streets below. She returned to her table and sat down opposite Elias Gable, whose face was a study in pure, unadulterated astonishment. He looked as if he had just witnessed a kitten maul a python. Clara picked up her water glass. Her hand was perfectly, unnervingly steady. She took a long, slow sip, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. She met Gable's gaze, a flicker of her old, weary self momentarily visible in her eyes, before it was banked again by the new, steely resolve. "I believe," she said, her voice once again a quiet murmur, "that you were telling me about the animals in their natural habitat." The emergency board meeting the following day was not a meeting. It was an arena. Clara walked into the cavernous, mahogany-panelled room on the 100th floor of Finch Tower and felt the collective force of 12 hostile minds focus on her. They were the old guard, the titans of industry who had sat at this table with Alistair for decades. They were men carved from granite and cynicism, and they looked at her with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. She was not one of them. She was a disruption, a cosmic error, a waitress in a CEO's chair. Donovan and Beatrice were there, seated to the right, their faces pale and venomous. Between them sat Silas Croft, a serpent in a Savile Row suit, his smile thin and predatory. "This meeting is an outrage," Croft began, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. A pathetic attempt by Miss Evans to deflect from her own manifest incompetence by launching a slanderous, unsubstantiated attack against the Finch family. "We are here today to vote, as per the bylaws, on the motion to install an interim CEO and begin the legal process of having Ms. Evans declared mentally unfit to manage this estate." Clara remained standing at the head of the table, in the tall leather chair that still seemed to hold the imprint of Alistair Finch. She let the silence stretch after Croft's pronouncement, letting his venom hang in the air until it became stale. "There will be no such vote," she said finally. Her voice did not carry the artificial boom of power, but the quiet, unshakable weight of certainty. She nodded to Gable, who, with the help of 2 assistants, began placing a thick, spiral-bound portfolio in front of each board member. "What you have before you," Clara announced, her gaze sweeping across the 12 stone-faced men, "is not an accusation. It is a confession. It contains the complete, unedited audio recording from the Aurelia restaurant last night, where Mr. Finch detailed his plan to defraud this company of over $200 million. It contains the preliminary forensic accounting report, which shows the wire transfers to the Phoenix Fund's Shell Corporation in Belize. It contains copies of the falsified asset valuation reports Mr. Finch submitted, with his signature clearly visible, and for good measure, it contains a detailed breakdown of the $7.3 million in corporate funds Ms. Finch has illegally used to finance her personal lifestyle over the past 2 years, including invoices for couture gowns, yacht rentals, and, my personal favorite, a $10,000 charge for equine psychotherapy for her prize-winning show pony. A low murmur rippled through the room. Silas Croft's smile had vanished. Beatrice looked as if she might faint. "These are lies, fabrications, the ravings of a lunatic," Donovan shouted, his voice cracking as he surged to his feet. "Are they?" Clara's voice was ice. "Then perhaps you can explain them to the FBI. Mr. Gable filed a formal complaint with their white-collar crime division an hour ago. They found it compelling." She let that sink in before she continued, her tone shifting from prosecutor to leader. "Gentlemen, I understand your skepticism. I know what you see when you look at me. You see a waitress. You see a girl who poured your coffee, who cleared your plates. You don't see an heir. And you are right. I am not Alistair Finch's heir by blood." She paused, walking slowly along the side of the table, forcing them to turn and look at her. "Alistair Finch didn't leave me his fortune because I was kind to him in a diner. He left me his company because he saw in me the one thing he had lost in his own children. Hunger, not a hunger for money, but a hunger for work, a hunger to build, not just to acquire. He spent his life creating a fortress, and he died knowing he had raised 2 people who were selling the stones from the foundation to buy champagne. He called them vultures. He wanted an eagle." She arrived back at the head of the table, placing her hands on the back of the great chair. For 20 years, this company's stock has been stagnant. Its innovation has stalled. Why? Because it has been treated as a private bank, a source of passive income for two people who have never created a single thing of value in their lives. That ends today. The $200 million that Donovan Finch tried to steal will be redirected. $100 million will go into R&D for the tech division he almost destroyed. The other $100 million will be distributed as bonuses to every single employee of this company. From the factory floor to the mail room, the people whose labor you have all profited from for years. The silence in the room was now one of stunned shock. "You see a waitress," she concluded, her voice ringing with a power they could not deny. "I see a woman who knows the value of $1 because she's had to stretch one into a meal for 3. I see a woman who earned her education in finance at 3 in the morning after a 10-hour shift. And I promise you this, no one in this room will fight harder, work longer, or care more about the future of Finch Consolidated and every single person who depends on it than I will. Now, Mr. Croft, are there any other motions you would like to bring to the floor?" The room was utterly still. Then, Harrison Shaw, the oldest member of the board, a man who had built his first factory with Alistair 50 years ago, slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He looked at Donovan and Beatrice with profound disappointment, then turned his gaze to Clara. A slow, grudging smile spread across his weathered face. "No, Ms. Evans," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I believe the only motion on the floor is to formally welcome you as our new Chief Executive Officer." One by one, the other board members, seeing the tide turn, began to nod in agreement. The battle was over. The war had just begun. The first act of CEO Clara Evans was not to issue a press release or meet with investors. It was to sit in a sterile hospital waiting room, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, and sign a single personal check. It was for an amount that would have once seemed like a cosmic impossibility, made out to the pediatric cardiac wing of Chicago General Hospital. As her brother, Leo, pale but smiling weakly, was wheeled into the operating room, he squeezed her hand. "You did it, Clara," he whispered, his voice raspy. "You were always the smart one. I knew you'd save the world someday. You just started with me." The months that followed were a blur of 18-hour days, a crucible of relentless work and crushing pressure. She didn't move into the Finch mansion, a place that felt haunted by the ghosts of loveless entitlement. Instead, she began the complex process of converting the 40-room estate into the Alistair Finch Haven for Hope, a state-of-the-art, free-of-charge palliative care facility for terminally ill children and their families. She and Leo, now recovering with a new, steady heartbeat, moved into a comfortable but modest brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, a world away from the cold opulence she now commanded. At Finch Consolidated, she was a quiet hurricane. She spent her first 3 months not in the penthouse suite, but on the factory floors in Ohio, in the shipping warehouses in Texas, and in the call centers in Manila. She listened. She learned the names of the line foremen, the engineers, the janitors. She ate in their cafeterias. She saw the worn-out equipment, the outdated safety protocols, the quiet desperation of people who felt invisible to the empire they served. Then she acted. She instituted company-wide profit sharing. She raised the minimum wage to a living wage. She invested $500 million in infrastructure upgrades, worker safety, and tuition reimbursement programs for employees and their children. The board, initially terrified by the massive expenditure, was silenced by the results. Employee turnover plummeted. Productivity skyrocketed. and from the revitalized, empowered workforce, a torrent of innovation began to flow. Finch consolidated. The sleeping giant began to wake up. Donovan and Beatrice, facing a mountain of federal charges and public disgrace, accepted a plea deal that stripped them of their every remaining asset and left them with nothing but their tarnished name and a suspended sentence that felt like a life sentence of irrelevance. One rainy autumn evening, a year to the day after Alistair Finch had walked into her life, Clara found herself driving through the old, forgotten industrial neighborhood. She didn't know why she was there, only that some unseen current had pulled her back. On an impulse, she pulled her modest sedan up to the curb outside the Haven. The sign was gone, the windows were boarded up, and a faded foreclosure notice was taped to the door, a monument to a life that no longer existed. She got out of the car, the cool, damp air a familiar comfort. She walked to the door and peered through a crack in the plywood. In the dusty darkness, she could see it all: the cracked vinyl of the booths, the sticky patch on the counter where the syrup dispenser always leaked, the ghost of a tired young woman wiping down tables, her mind a million miles away, dreaming of balance sheets and a life without fear. And in the corner, by the radiator, sat the ghost of a frail, shivering old man with the eyes of a king. A wave of profound, aching gratitude washed over her. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out the worn, creased $5 bill she now carried with her always. It was her compass, her true north. Alistair Finch had gone out into the storm searching for integrity, a single, incorruptible soul in a world of transactions. But in finding her, he had found something more. He had found a way to redeem his own life's work. He had spent a lifetime building an empire on the ruthless principles of acquisition and control. But it was a waitress with nothing to her name who had taught him the ultimate lesson. True power isn't about what you can take. It's about what you can build. True value isn't what you own. It's what you are willing to give away. Clara smoothed the fragile bill in her hand. Alistair had given her a sword, and she had used it. But now, in the quiet solitude of this fallen diner, she understood her true purpose. It was not just to wield the sword, but to one day turn it into a plowshare, to build a new kind of empire, one measured not by its market cap, but by its capacity for dignity, a legacy built not of steel and glass, but of quiet courage, second chances, and the revolutionary power of unexpected kindness. The rain began to fall harder, washing the grimy city clean, and Clara Evans smiled, turned from the ghost of her past, and drove toward her future.